And it's my pleasure to welcome Meri Beckwith from Lindus Health to the show. Meri, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Danny. Great to meet you, and thanks so much for chatting with me.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, and thank you so much to Jody Perkins for helping facilitate this and get it to happen. It's getting on summer here in Tel Aviv. It's getting hot already, but it's a beautiful day. Uh,
Yep, I'm jealous of your how close you are to the ocean. Well, I'm in London. We're doing our whole team kind of offsite gathering in London this week, and it's getting warm, but nowhere near warm enough for a swim. But yeah,
yeah, so it's like today, the past few days, it's been in the high 20s, low 30s in centigrade for our American listeners, right? So it's not.
yeah, important to specify.
Yeah, that's like mid 80s for you guys. And a lot of sun, and there's tremendous energy here, and there's just tremendous energy in what you guys are doing. So I think that'd be great time to talk about your journey, how you came from, to understand to the point where you said, this is something I must do.
Yeah, a great place to start. So, by background, I spent most of my career in kind of life sciences and med tech venture capital. And all the companies we invested in really struggled when it came to their clinical trials. They were constantly late. They often worked with CROs who seemed to be always over budget, and it just seemed to be a really common pain point. And I remember in sort of 2014 reading about Eroom's law, which is this concept which shows that the cost to develop a new drug or health treatment has increased exponentially over the last 70 years. And it seemed to me that this must have something to do with clinical trials. And I had that in the back of my mind. And fast forward to 2020, I ended up volunteering for a number of clinical trials, including one of the large COVID vaccine phase threes. And that was kind of the light bulb moment because the whole experience as a participant was really slow and difficult and broken. And I couldn't square that with like, okay, you want to enroll as many participants as possible. It's COVID. They have tons of money to throw at this. But why am I to like download an old version of Internet Explorer to express interest in the trial? Why am I going through these like rounds of really weird like telephone interviews that have clearly been like outsourced to a call center? I thought I was being scammed, and I just thought this could be so much smoother and more efficient. And then once I was on the trial, there were just loads of like kind of very strange things that didn't make sense. So, we were constantly being asked about our flu symptoms and being told, "Oh, pretend it's asking you about COVID," and that didn't make any sense to me. Like, why isn't there a questionnaire for COVID, and so on. So anyway, I realized that, oh, all these operational issues that I experienced on the ground as a participant kind of add up to these huge delays and cost overruns that we would talk about in board meetings. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that, the CROs commonly, run or have end-to-end oversight of a clinical trial. And, they must not be doing a great job if this is kind of the mean. And yeah, it became very clear to me that there was an opportunity with a different business model, and by applying technology intelligently, we could deliver clinical trials much faster and more efficiently. So yeah, that was the start of the Linda story. Yeah.
When did you start?
Well, formally founded in March 2021, but we've been working on it for a little while before that. Yeah.
Well, it's not, well, that's, you've done, I've seen the stuff you on the website. You basically created an integrated data management system, haven't you?
Yeah, and obviously I know this is obviously an area you're very much an expert in. So I'll get a bit technical, but I'm sure you'll run rings around me. But yeah, we part of our vision is that by integrating technology in every step, we can deliver, not just more efficiency, not just a better patient experience, but ultimately higher quality data for sponsors, which is ultimately like, the whole point of running a trial. So we do have our own kind of database, EDC, and CTMS system called Citrus. All three of those, bundles of features in one. It does have its own database. We spend a lot of time and effort. We make sure it codes and stores all data natively in CDISC SDTM. We have a kind of a partnership with CDISC and spend a lot of time with them. For instance, helping them use AI to update kind of data standards, just to make sure that we're, at the cutting edge of how clinical data is captured and stored. So yeah, it's an area of big interest to us.
That's very, very important to standardize on data.
Mhm.
And one of the things that really surprised me, and I'm curious, how this fits into your strategy, is that it's been surprising how few sponsors actually use how little data for machine learning. And
Yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, so firstly, yeah, I think until recently there were good regulatory reasons, that made it quite difficult to certify, like, let's say, a diagnostic device that used machine learning at its core. The FDA has just issued guidance for both medical devices and drugs. So medical devices that use, like, let's say, machine learning to, deliver a diagnosis or a treatment, and drugs that have been developed, using machine learning, which kind of supports the development of those compounds, of those treatments. But also, were you talking about, like, during the clinical trial process itself, or more like the actual health intervention? Yeah.
So not the intervention itself, because we had some customers who are doing this, like machine
Yeah.
learning is part of the product, but I'm talking about actually using the clinical data you collect during the trial to improve your monitoring, after the trial to improve your performance,
Ah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
during the trial, using machine learning. And so it's just incredible how few sponsors use so few data that they collect actually to improve the process. You can call it machine learning or statistical learning or anything you want, but it's surprising how they're still sort of like at a circa nine. I thought it was 90s. We had a conversation with a woman at Pfizer when we first got started, and I said something, oh, we're stuck in the 90s. She said, no, Danny, you were being way too charitable. We're stuck in the 50s. Okay.
Yeah. That's really, yes. So I think historically there are a couple reasons for this. Firstly, as a CRO, the data you generate on a clinical trial is your customer's data, right? Because it's about, their drug, their endpoints. Um, and so there's been kind of a reluctance, sponsors are very reluctant to sign away any ongoing rights to, like, process data, for understandable reasons. However, we've never had an issue asking sponsors to give us ongoing access to strictly anonymized data that is not related, it's not like a trial endpoint, but essentially trial metadata about the operations of the trial. And we use that for machine learning. So concretely, we deploy models in a number of places. For instance, models to try and predict how well participants will retain and adhere to a trial schedule, and then send alerts when, the model suspects that a participant might be at risk of withdrawal. It would send an alert to a trial coordinator, ask them to check in with that participant, or to a site. We also use, for today, simple machine learning models to do centralized real-time monitoring on trial data. And I think this is, like, a massive area that remains totally unexplored. Um, so, today, as you probably know, in clinical trials, the gold standard of monitoring is sending in individuals to do, source data verification. And what you're doing there is you're essentially checking, like, okay, what the trial is recorded, does that match, like, the source document? So basically, you're looking for transcription errors between what was recorded, at the site, or, and what was actually stored in the trial database. But yeah, I mean, hopefully, you can see what's wrong with that, right? Because there are often many issues with what gets recorded at source in the first place, and that doesn't do anything to address those
But
challenges.
yeah, it's
And this is what centralized real-time monitoring can do. So a simple example from a recent study, we had a number of sites. It was a pretty straightforward trial in weight management, and we noticed that one of the sites was consistently, had very strange, all of a sudden it started having very strange weight measurements for participants. So their, participant A, B, and C's weight would all jump, by more than one standard deviation between measurements. And so we immediately created an alert, and then we checked in with the site, and it turns out they had, like, miscalibrated their weighing scales. Really dumb, but that's the difference between that trial hitting its endpoints and missing its endpoints. And so that's what you can do with centralized real-time monitoring. And I share your frustration. Like, when we talk to sponsors, they all want to hear about SDV. What percentage SDV are you doing? And I'm like, well, we'll do 100%, but what you should care about is that source data accurate? And let's talk about strategies to make sure that source data is accurate and doing it in real time as well, when you can actually intervene and correct these errors, not just spotting them retrospectively.
100%. So as we all know, anybody who looked at the car industry knows, and all these Toyota recalls knows that the cost of fixing an error after the product is released to the public is 100 times the cost of fixing it when it's on.
Yep.
So I mean, yeah, so we had to. This was I can totally sympathize with you because this was a conversation we had with every sponsor we had. It was like they said, "Oh yeah, we want to do 100% SPV." So I said, first of all, why? Let's say, okay, we'll do 100% SDV. Now let's talk about monitoring. No, they said, but that is monitoring. You don't understand. I said, no, that's not monitoring. Monitoring is to monitor GCP. In other words, to look, to observe it. Let's call it observability. So you say you want to be able to see if you have safety issues. You want to be able to see if you have quality spikes, like you said, one standard deviation above the weight. And you want to see if you have issues related to the way sites are working. So you might have one site that's doing great and another site that's doing crazy things. And so we did similar things to what you're saying, but we always had this deep philosophical discussion about the difference between monitoring and SDB. And then I would often quote our own studies and then studies that Medidata did like over 10 years ago that said that Medidata study, they looked at 14,000 studies and they said that less than 3% of the data points that were SDV were actually updated by SDV. In our own studies, it was less than 1% because when you have well-designed edit checks and good real monitoring, then there's no reason. So
Yeah.
I said, look, I'm going to give you a business proposition. It's just like this. If I told you that you're spending 30% of your budget, maybe even 50% of your budget on something that gives you less than 3% ROI, would that be a good business decision in that?
Yeah. It's crazy, right? And I think, it's a great illustration of where the industry goes wrong systematically. There's almost like this like cargo cult mentality where, because or like a meme where, oh, 100, if you're doing less than 100% SDV, you're cutting corners. It doesn't matter whether you can make a rational argument to say like, no, like you could spend the money much better elsewhere. People are much more interested in following what is perceived to be the gold standard way to run a trial than what is actually provably, a better way to run a trial. And it frustrates me a lot. And we can
Yeah, so
talk about it for a while. Yeah.
I should come visit you and I'll buy you a beer. So really,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, so we were up in that speed a long time, a few times, more than a few times. With every sponsor we
And
have.
actually, I mean, like how many, percentage of the sponsors you worked with, how many were receptive to that argument that, hey, look, SDV is kind of 100% SDV is a waste of money. Let's maybe design just a more holistic, call it monitoring strategy. What's the, yeah.
So I want to say that they all wanted to do 100% SDB. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
No
same.
one,
Yeah.
no one didn't not want to do 100%. Even when I pulled this, this economic lack of ROI argument out of my hip pocket, they said, "Yeah, but you have to do SDB." And there were all kinds of reasons why they wanted to do it, but I like the cargo cult mentality analogy you use. But percent of our responses is not quite for me at least, not the question was what percent of the data. So we had, I think. Um, we had collected like 10 million data points with 13 trials where we were fortunate to implement our strategy of monitoring, what I call monitoring, what you
Mhm.
and I call monitoring, which is
Yeah.
looking at you know GCP monitoring, looking at data quality issues, looking at things that are related to the endpoints. Real monitoring, not SDV, and they still did SDV. We even had a client who did SDV on the ePro, and at one point, one of my project managers said, that so and so is doing SDV on the ePro." I said, "But that's insane, right? There's
Yeah.
not."
Well, what was, I know that doesn't, yeah. What is the source? Hang on. Yeah.
Hang
The
on, why are
ePro
you?
source. Yeah.
So I said, I told the project manager, go talk to the CEO of the sponsor and explain that it's a bad idea. And he's paying that they're billing him a lot of money with no absolute reason or logic behind
It's,
it.
I'm imagining looking at two copies of the exact same ePro questionnaire. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So my first reaction was this must be a mistake. And he just said, no, let me show you the EDC. And she showed me that they had like SDB, like thousands of ePro points. When you look at the ePro, there's a lot of ePro data. So
Wow.
so that was kind of an insane moment. But
That's hilarious.
isn't that
Uh,
great? Don't you love that? So
the
that's
team, yeah, I'll tell the team here. They'll absolutely love that. Yeah.
they'll love that story, and they'll probably sympathize with it. So, but in fact, the biggest success stories we had, and this is the good news, and this is I'm telling you this to kind of like, give you moral support, is that the biggest success stories we had were when the sponsors bought into the notion of real-time monitoring for two reasons. First of all, because it gave them observability, because they could see what's going on and getting real-time alerts. And the second, because when you have real-time alerts, you can fix things so cheaply,
Yeah.
quickly, and like it was like, oh my God, they were saying things like, I remember we had a support call from someone and they said, there must be a bug in the system. I said, why would you think there's a bug in the system? And the support person, I told the support person, said, ask the customer why they think there's a bug in our monitoring system. They said, because we're getting alerts, they were getting alerts at like 2 o'clock in the morning. So it turns out that one of the patients was working shifts
Ah, yeah.
and she was coming home in the middle of the night and using it was they had it was a connected drug, so it was like something you put on and you sniff. So they the system was kind of like banging out alerts because it seemed like it was out of out of normal range or something like that. So after that, that was actually a really aha moment for us. We said, well, we can improve the way we do these alerts and look more like at the regular patterns and also kind of wide. So we had this discussion, and by the way, it was a great discussion with the customer. And we said, look, let's talk about the surface level objectives for the sites. Now we can talk about SLO. We can talk about your surface SLA with the sites. Now we can have real discussions based on what's supposed to happen. And so we talk to the customer, and the customer say, okay, well, let's widen the window for the alerts. And that way we'll have less alerts, but we'll have good coverage. They got to the point where they were having alerts within an hour of the patient being in the clinic, and they could see what was going on. So the biggest success stories we had were by people who still did 100% SDB, but they bought into the notion that
Yeah. Yeah, and it's super interesting because like maybe I remember early in the journey of Lindus being like inspired and shocked, I guess, by this FDA guidance document that was it Steve Hahn or Scott Gottlieb wrote, I think it was in like 2019, 2020, where he was basically admonishing the industry for like, why are you still doing 100% STV? Why aren't you, using, making more use of decentralized visits, like all these things that would manifestly lead to lower costs. And I was like, in what other industry does the regulator admonish, pharma and CROs for not using technology to like cut costs and drive efficiency? And I was just like that was one of the moments when I was like, okay, there's definitely something going on here because there's clearly just because the classic is like, oh well, it must be a regulatory requirement. It not only is not a regulatory requirement, the regulator is actively pushing the industry to adopt some of these techniques. So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
right.
actually want to go on to that because yeah, I've had a few discussions with people where they are they're folks initiatives to kind of increase trial efficiency and everyone talks about reducing percentage STV, but I'm like they shouldn't be intention. I agree with you, right? Like you can design a plan that gets you to 100% STV but does it in a much more kind of like a more holistic way and does it in real time. And I think that real time component, that's what everyone sort of misses out in the discussion. But to do that is very hard. You need, a complete look through view from as soon as data goes in source, you need to set up alerts, et cetera, et cetera. And that's
Yeah.
why we built our own system to enable all of that. So yeah,
So you did the right thing.
yeah.
You did the right thing for sure. And I think, by the way, that's right. Scott Gottlieb wrote that in 2019. But before that, there was the draft guidance for remote risk-based monitoring in 2009. It was 10
Yeah,
years for
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And they, by the way, since then, FDA has taken that guidance document off the website. But the original version I still have, I think, said, we never told you to do 100% FTP. We never told you not to use modern information technology to monitor clinical trials. We never told you that.
yeah,
And that was the language used in the 2009 draft guidance for risk-based monitoring. So when we first started the company, my co-founder said, let's do risk-based monitoring. I said, that's a great idea. But I said, I tell you what, I'm a tech guy. I didn't come out of the clinical world. She's a clinical person, right? So I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make it really easy. I don't understand what's going on here because I'm coming from tech. I worked at Intel. So I'm coming from places when we said observability, it happens right now. And she said, yeah, but it's a lot of data. I said, it's not a lot of data, it's nothing. Okay. So a lot of data is what we were doing at one of my other startups. We were monitoring 10 gigabits a second on telecom provider networks. That's a
yeah,
lot of data. Okay. 10 gigabit a second is a lot of data. And if we can do it at 10 gigabit a second on telecom provider networks, you can certainly do it for 5 patient visits a day. Okay.
yeah. Um, yeah, it's funny. I was actually talking to Denali Rose, who, along with Brad Hightower, run the Note to File podcast, kind of from a clinical trial site perspective. And Denali shared this amazing anecdote where, like, look, like I made peace with how these things come about through pot roasts, and I think she described how her like mother, whenever she would make a pot roast, she had like a piece of beef and would always like cut the ends off and then put it in the pot and whatever. And Zanali was like, "What? Why do you cut the ends off?" And her mother was like, "Oh, I don't know." And it turns out that their grandmother, when she would make pot roasts, her pot was too small, so would always have to cut the ends off the beef to make it fit in the pot. It's like, you just sort of like blindly follow. Maybe it wasn't her a relation of hers, but just like, yeah, great example of just kind of like blindly following this this tradition rather than like really thinking through from first principles, like, is this necessary? And I'm like, that's the best bit. The best bit of the beef is the ends. Like, you don't want to. So
That's right. That's
yeah,
right. That's hilarious because when we would make rows, my kids sort of wanted the middle part because it was softer, but I sort of sold them a bill of goods. I said, the best part is the ends. I said, you want the best part. Instead of calling it the end, we said the best part. You want who wants the best part? And like, quickly they figured out that it really was the best part because it was crispier and easier to deal with when they were small. So it was like to this day, my kids still remember that, calling the endpoints the best parts, right? So,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great story. God, so that sort of brings us to the next point in the show, which I always ask. In your case, is really fascinating, which is how you capture value.
Yeah. Great question. So, first and foremost, we have a different business model. I think a large part of the dysfunction we observe, in the sponsor CRO relationship is because CROs bill by the hour. And so, they're not incentivized to deliver a trial, they're incentivized to spend hours. And the sponsor then has to micromanage them and say, oh, do more hours on 100% STV or whatever. So what we do is we do purely fixed cost agreements where, you sign a contract with us, there will be a fixed amount that our sponsor pays us when the trial hits pre-agreed milestones, and that's it. And so, it's incumbent on us to do whatever we need to do to keep the trial moving, to hit the milestones, and to do it in a way that maximizes quality, or we literally don't get paid. And that mindset, it's actually like pretty amazing how it cascades through the organization. Everyone from our trial coordinators, our trial managers, through to our data managers, it's constantly like, okay, I've only got a set number of hours. How can I like set this up in the most efficient way? How can we ensure that we can get sites set up quickly, keep patients moving? And everyone tells us our team tells us it's just like a very different mindset from what they're used to at a CRO, where it's all about timesheets. We have folks who worked at big CROs like project managers, where their main KPI for their promotion internally was like how many change orders they could issue and how quickly they could issue them, which I think tells you all you need to know. So anyway, yeah, so that's how we deliver value to our customers, but we create the value as well because we're then incentivized to, use technology in clever ways to just make the whole trial more efficient. And so it's kind of win-win and, aligns incentives. Yeah.
Kind of win-win. It's totally win-win, and you're doing the right thing, and it's good for everyone. So your customers are sponsors. I saw on the website. So what's your sweet spot in terms of?
So I'll describe to you in terms of trial types, and then I'll actually answer the question. So, we started deliberately doing simple non-drug trials, like early in the early days of Lindus. So, medical devices, diagnostics, digital health trials. We now do obviously drug trials as well, but we're kind of fairly focused in terms of the phases and indications we do currently. So the goal is to ensure that the breadth of what we can serve kind of expands with our footprint because we don't just, we want to remain focused. We don't just want to be everything, try and be everything to everybody. So we obviously still do medical devices, diagnostics trials, kind of consumer health trials. But we also obviously do drug trials in particularly cardiometabolic, respiratory, reproductive health, psychiatry, and dermatology. So those are kind of our main therapy areas. Yeah.
So psychiatry is really for our readers. I'm going to say something which, he sort of said it with this English understatement. Okay. So you should know that talking to the reader, to listeners now. So listeners, please know that psychiatry is an insanely difficult space for compliance. Okay.
Yeah,
It's well known. Okay. And the only way you can really do it well is by having real-time monitoring.
exactly.
Did
That's why.
I say that right? Can I?
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, one of the many unique challenges of psychiatry, along with, eligibility confirmation. So that's partly why we decided to focus early in psychiatry because our real-time monitoring capability gives us a particular edge. So like, we capture tons of metadata about, when someone filled out an ePro, we can tell if you're just like
No.
Christmas treeing the answers, i.e., just like, filling out random answers, because we can see like the time taken to, input each item on a PHQ-9, and we can clearly see if you're making it up. So that's part of the rationale for why we went into psychiatry. We also, in the early days of the company, we have a interesting partnership with Oxford University's Department of Psychiatry and a lot of kind of team members from there. So yeah, we have the expertise as well.
That's a great. That's a. I would say for me, it's a sweet spot. Seems to me. So it's good application of an important clinical area with your business model and your technology model. Um, Wrap it up with what's like an interview question. You know how they would always ask you in interviews, where do you want to be in 5 years? So I have kind of like a different take on that, which is what are three things you need to do over the next 12 to 18 months?
Okay, 12 to 18 months. Ooh, gosh. Uh, you know, the main thing is we need to continue doing what we're doing, right? Which is fine. That's, doesn't sound super challenging, but, we have serious ambitions in the space and that requires us to continue to grow. So we need to, maintain the level of quality we have, maintain the team culture we have, maintain the ways of working while growing quickly. And we need to do that without just becoming a big sort of bloated CRO. And I think that danger is real. One, because you're hiring folks who are from a CRO background, so the risk is they can kind of import their assumptions, chopping off the ends of the pot roast. Uh, and so you kind of guard against that. And two, um, you know, I think one of the biggest issues in this space, and the more time I spend in the space, the more I realize this, is that yeah, CROs are naughty, let's say sometimes, but they're only as naughty as sponsors, and particularly pharma, let them be. So when pharma, insists that everything be done, bid grids, hourly billing, 100% SDV, the CRO just says, yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll SDV these ePros for you. Why not? Sure. We're billing you extra.
We'll bill you
Um,
for it.
yeah, exactly. And so we need to resist that because, or just be very careful about, the types of trials we undertake, the commercial arrangements, and just, have that kind of fixed cost business model. Yeah. Um,
Well, so My name is Danny Lieberman. I have the pleasure and honor to host Meri Beckwith, CEO of Lindus Health, the Anti-CRO. And if you're doing a psychiatry trial, you should definitely talk to these guys because they're going to help you get to the finish line a lot faster and surely better than anyone else. And look for us on all the major podcast channels on Spotify, on an Apple, and YouTube. We'll be going live in about 2 weeks. That's how long it takes us to process things. And thanks so much for Jody Perkins for quarterbacking this and getting us all together at the same time. Thank you again so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Danny. Really enjoyed the chat.
I enjoyed it as well. You're doing a big, good deed for the industry.